Hello and welcome to our presentation today on the employee experience using the employee lens to attract, retain, and engage your workforce. My name is Charles Rogel and I'm the Vice President of Products and Marketing for DecisionWise, and I'll be the moderator for today's presentation. I'm joined today by Dr. Tracy Maylett.
Hi all, Charles, thanks for the opportunity.
Tracy's the CEO and President of DecisionWise. He holds a doctorate in organization change from Pepperdine University and also an MBA from Brigham Young University. He works with executive teams from around the world to improve organization culture and drive performance, and he's especially a specialist on this topic today of the employee experience. Before we begin, there are a few items I'd like to cover. Number one, for this presentation, it'll last for 60 minutes. Everyone will be on mute, so if you have any questions, please submit them using the question feature on the toolbar, and we'll try to address them towards the end of the presentation. After today's session, I'll be sending you an email with links to the slides as well as other items. So Tracy, as we begin this presentation, let's first talk about this term, the employee experience, in terms of the customer experience.
I like starting off with the idea of customer experience because we've all heard this over the last little bit. In fact, there's been a much greater emphasis on the term and the service of customer experience over the last little while. So let's define that. First of all, customer experience is exactly what it says, is I as a customer, or I as somebody purchasing a product or about to purchase a product, it's that experience that I receive when I'm about to do that or when I'm doing that. So the term customer experience has really received a lot more emphasis over the past decade. We're seeing measurement of customer experience, and we often see this shortened to simply the abbreviation CX. We're seeing a much greater emphasis over the last little while.
And it's grown a little bit because, it started off as customer satisfaction.
Right.
Just measuring, are you satisfied with your food or with the shopping experience, whatever the case is. But it's kind of morphed into a broader term where it's really more comprehensive in terms of, how you experience the brand, how you experience the interaction that you had, the feelings you got from your experience with the store.
Exactly, and I like the way they've moved from satisfaction to experience. Now, while this isn't a webinar about customer satisfaction or customer experience, it does set up something that I want to talk about in just a moment, and that's the idea of employee experience. And we're going to draw a lot of parallels between the two and show you the needed emphasis in that area. So we all have our customer experience stories. One of the things when we come into work, you're talking to somebody, and inevitably someone will start talking about a customer experience. So I'm going to start sharing a couple of mine. These have happened within the last couple of weeks, and I won't give the names of the organizations, but one was a fast food organization or fast food restaurant chain, very well known, and the next one was an experience with my mobile phone carrier. So I'll just talk a little bit about that. We'll start first of all with the experience that I had with this fast food restaurant. Charles, you probably had similar experiences as you go in here, but this was one that was interesting. It was about 11:30 at night. We just participated in a cultural event. My family and I were coming back, and we had two of our boys with us, both teenagers. So it's 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, and nothing's open at night. This was during a weeknight, actually. And so we stopped at a well-known fast food place because the boys were hungry, we were hungry. We decided we wanted to get something to eat. We went in the restaurant, and the restaurant was not very well taken care of. It was quite a surprise, actually, for this chain because they're usually pretty decent. We walked in there, and we saw that there was quite a line, and there were a bunch of people that weren't waiting to order, but people that were back behind. So finally we got up there, and it took about somewhere in the neighborhood of about 10 to 15 minutes before someone even acknowledged us or took our order. They took our order, and as we were waiting, we noticed first 10 minutes went by, 15 minutes went by, and my wife leaned over to me. She said, "Do you know that nobody's receiving their food?" We looked and watched for a few minutes, and there's another 5 minutes that went by, and nobody received
So everyone's waiting there for
Everybody's just waiting there, and everyone starts to complain to each other, and they're comparing how long they've been waiting in line. Some people had been up there for longer than 30 minutes, and they'd actually pushed the timer to see what was going on. So anyway, we waited there for about 30 minutes, and I couldn't believe we did this. We typically would leave at that point in time, but we started seeing people going up, and they were saying, "Look, I've been here for 45 minutes or even 50 minutes." One person claimed they'd been there an hour. I don't know if that was accurate or not.
And you've already paid. So
you've already paid.
Yeah.
So we just decided, let's just go get our money back and leave. Well, we had to get in line behind another 6 or 7 groups that wanted to get their money back. So as we were trying to do that, I noticed a sign on the wall that said, our guest satisfaction is our first primary concern, something along those lines, and said, log on and take this survey. Not only will you take the survey and tell us how we're doing, but you also get free fries, or I don't remember what it was. So I log on to this and start taking the survey, and I realize about 3 or 4 minutes into the survey, they haven't asked me any questions at all about my experience yet. They were asking me questions about how this particular product that they serve for breakfast was, and of course we weren't ordering breakfast. Bottom line is they didn't ask me anything about what I wanted to tell them. So even as we're trying to measure customer experience, or not measuring customer experience, a similar thing happened to me when I looked at my mobile phone carrier. This happened last week, and I kept calling in because every month for the last 5 or 6 months, my phone bill had changed, even though I hadn't changed service or used anything different. My plan was to be a static plan. So I called in, and I was transferred around 2 or 3 different times, and finally got to a person who didn't really sound like they cared much. But they were able to finally tell me, "I'm sorry, sir, that's just the way it is. You're going to have to talk to somebody else." Well, I knew I wasn't wrong in this case because my phone bill didn't change, so I hung up and called again. What happened in the meantime was that I received a telephone call back asking me if I was willing to take a survey. The survey, same as the fast food place, asked me a lot of questions about the call center agent that I dealt with. Remember, this was the third agent, but didn't ask me anything about what I wanted to tell them. I wanted to tell them I'm calling because I'm receiving poor service and my bill keeps changing. But they asked me 3 questions that didn't have anything to do with it. So, Charles, 2 long stories to tell you a little bit about some of the things that even as we're trying to measure customer experience, we're not doing it the right way.
Yeah.
What this leads to really is these types of surveys that we're taking aren't really, they're looking at it through the lens of the company itself. So it's what we as a company want to know about you, rather than looking at it through the real customer experience lens that says, "Customer, what do you want to tell us?" Now those organizations or companies that are able to do that are much more effective.
And it's interesting because I think there's a lot of research, especially in the customer experience realm, about topics that drive performance or drive revenue for them. So, you have to have a clean restaurant, for example, and you have to get the order right, order accuracy, and then the food's got to be warm, and it's got to be the right order. So there's a lot of focus on those measurements, but when something different happens outside of that box, it's almost impossible to capture that information.
Now here's a sneak preview. Think about your employee survey and what your employee survey is measuring. And most of the time, it's funny, it's interesting as clients come to us with a preconceived customer survey or employee survey, that employee survey is often tailored to what the company wants to know. Mm-hmm. One of the things I realized as I was taking these 2 surveys, and I do like to take the surveys to see what's on there and also to provide feedback, but I noticed that they were really marketing surveys. In fact, the fast food restaurant was asking me about all kinds of breakfast foods, whether or not I tried those, and if I had,
the new products.
That's exactly it. Now, one of the things that we're also noticing lately is that with the increase of social media, we're seeing that these experiences are being shared more and more. Customer experiences are being shared much more than they were. In fact, this statistic was interesting. 59% of 25 to 34-year-olds say they share poor customer experiences online. Now, here's some other statistics along those lines. After a negative customer service experience, 58% will never use the company again. So you've lost half of your clients or customers right then.
Wow.
Another half will tell friends not to use the business. And 34% say they would take revenge by posting a negative online review. I have to admit I've done that.
Well, hotels live and die by this. TripAdvisor, if they get a negative review, I know when I'm searching for hotels, I'm like, I don't know if I want to stay there now. And they're really powerful.
Yeah, I may look at 30 positive reviews and I see one review that says the word roach in it, and I'm out of there pretty quickly. Yep. Right. So interesting. Now look at the positive customer side of this, and that is after a positive customer service experience, 69% would recommend the company to others. I also admit I do this pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. If I find a place that I like, particularly as our consultants and our assessment advisors travel quite a bit, I'm very quick to say, when you're there, you need to stop at whatever, or you need to stay here.
But it's difficult. I think people are much more likely to give a negative review than they are a positive.
Sure.
In many cases.
Yeah. It's interesting, though. I looked at this, and as these results say, this is a Salesforce study, 69% would actually recommend that company, and they actively do that. 50% would use the business more frequently. More frequently, not just continue using the business. So, we've talked a lot about customer experience. And this isn't a webinar, as we mentioned, about customer service or about customer experience. It really is about employee experience. So here's a question. What would your employees tell others about your organization? Now, especially when we have all kinds of social media platforms now where people can express their voice about their last job or their current job, the word's getting out.
Yeah.
So what would your employees tell others about your organization?
Yeah, and it's getting more popular. There's sites like Glassdoor and other places where employees can write reviews about their company, and it's a difficult thing to manage for organizations nowadays.
It is, absolutely, and it's one of those things that you really can't manage other than the input that goes into it. Once it's posted, I mean, it's there.
Yep.
It's up.
Yep.
So a number of years ago, in fact, back in 2003, this idea of a net promoter score was introduced. It was introduced in terms of marketing and also customer satisfaction and customer experience. And basically introduced, first of all, through a 2003 Harvard Business Review article and a subsequent publication and book. It was titled One Number You Need to Grow. And the question, the Net Promoter Score, NPS question, was how likely are you to recommend XYZ company to others? And from that single question, you would derive a score that would tell you all the way from 100 to a negative 100, meaning not likely at all, what your score was or how likely it was that people would recommend your company. You could then compare that against other organizations and see how you're doing, or other stores or other restaurants or other parts of your business. I'm quite sure that restaurant that I stopped at probably received a very negative score that night in comparison to maybe even other times. So what if we were to take that concept of Net Promoter Score and introduce that into our organizations for an internal idea of how our employees would do, how they would recommend our company? So we've started using this idea as of about 2 or 3 years ago of what we refer to as an internal promoter ratio, so an IPR. An IPR would ask a single question, and we quite often ask this either alone or as part of an employee engagement survey. I would recommend XYZ company, so I would recommend DecisionWise to others as a great place to work. And from that, we calculate what we refer to as the internal promoter ratio. By the way, just as an FYI, the current internal promoter ratio in the United States that we find is about 6.27 promoters to every detractor.
And this is really interesting because the data we can mine from this individual question is really insightful into what's going on in the organization, because as we compare that question to the other, so say someone gave a 5, very strongly agreed to that question, we could look at all the other questions they responded to and correlate and find out what's really driving their response to that question.
What went into it. So one organization we just ran a survey for not very long ago, an engagement survey. They had in one department an internal promoter ratio of about 51 to 1. So that meant they had 51 promoters for every detractor. In that same organization, they had a ratio of about 2.5 to 1 in other departments.
Wow.
So what that was saying is there's something happening in these departments that's not happening in the other departments. And through these correlations, we can figure out what it is. Well, this is not a webinar on an internal promoter ratio, but one of the things I want to point out here is that what would happen if we really started looking at the employee experience the same way we looked at the customer experience. So 2 questions. First question, what would be different if we were to apply the principles and that emphasis of customer experience to employee experience? So that same degree of emphasis we've seen over the last few years with customer experience, what if we took that and used those principles with employee experience, the same degree of emphasis?
Now, I want to interrupt you here because I know there's some people out there probably saying, the one thing you always hear in customer experience is that, the customer is always right. So what if we're saying that, are you saying then that the employee is always right? We have to kind of cater to and coddle our employees even if it means hurting the organization?
Awesome question. I'm glad you asked that one. First of all, the first response is, I'm going to show you that here in just a minute, but the second response is really yes and no. That's a cheesy answer. It's an easy way out. I'll cover that here in just a moment, but the real thing I would come back to you on is, okay, but are you as an organization looking through the employee lens?
Yeah.
So are you really looking at the employee experience versus whether or not the employee is satisfied? And I'll show you the difference in just a minute. It's a good question. I want to make sure we circle back to that. Next question is, what would happen if we were to begin seeing things through that employee lens? You're going to hear us use that term quite often in this webinar, the employee lens. And I'll show you what that means in just a second. But if you had a pair of eyeglasses and were to look through a lens, how would you see the world if you were that employee versus the employer?
Well, and I think we lose that over time. So as people advance into management positions, they lose that connectivity they had to when they were first an employee, and experiencing everything as either a new employee or someone that doesn't, manage others, and seeing the different company policies or changes happening to them, and how management was explaining it to them.
Exactly.
And just, so we lose touch. We think, oh, they should understand. It's good for the organization. We're trying to make good things happen here. But in reality, it has a negative effect.
One of the things along those lines is I hope that every manager gets an opportunity, whether it's the C-suite or line level managers or whatever, to work with new employees, because to see that excitement that's there and seeing things new for the first time and viewing the organization through their eyes, there's a certain level of excitement. But in some organizations, there's also a level of disappointment that's there. So why is that so important? I'm going to go back to economics here for just a second. This is not just about making people feel good. There's really an economic factor here. This is Dr. James Tobin, and he was a Nobel Prize laureate a number of years ago for this idea of Tobins Q. Basically what it looks at is he was looking at these companies who are being sold for a lot more than they're actually worth, according to the street. And what he looked at it was, he said, how do we determine what the real value of that company is? And he came up with this formula called Tobins Q. First of all, he took a look at equity market value plus liabilities market value. So that is, as we look at the market, what does the company have on the pro side? What do they have in terms of debt, or on the negative side? Then we also look at the equity book value and liabilities book value, and we compare those, and we come up with a ratio, or come up with a division here, which is Tobins Q. So basically what this is taken is looking at the company's assets, looking at their liabilities, coming up with a formula of what that looks like.
But it's all derived from the balance sheet, you're saying?
So that much of this would be derived from the balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
But Tobin also said, but there's some other factors that aren't explained by the balance sheet that create value for the company. And he identified these in his formula by a couple different categories, two categories. One was market hype. So we don't have to look very far to understand the market hype idea. We have Facebook, that you have a number of other organizations that may not have made any money or incurred a lot of debt, yet the value of that organization is very high. So the market hype. So what are people saying out there? We also have this idea of intellectual capital. So organizational capital could be things such as customer lists, which is actually be customer capital. But organizational capital will be things like, what are the processes and the systems and the technology that they have? Customer capital would be, what are those relationships they have with key customers? So if I have a multi-billion-dollar relationship with X company that is number 5 on a list here, then people will pay me for that customer capital. The last one, which was very interesting, is the idea of human capital. That's the employees that you have and what's in their head. So even as we look at the economics of this, we realize that for organizations today, this idea of intellectual capital is much higher. So it's not just about looking at the book value of the organization in terms of their assets and liabilities. We now look at it in terms of what intellectual capital and market hype they have. So the reason I bring that up is because even more so than ever before, that idea of what is the employee experiencing, because that's what they're going to deliver in turn. And we'll show you this in here in just a minute. We look at our DecisionWise benchmark. So this is our 2014 benchmark, and we ran these numbers at the first of this year. We looked at over 14.4 million survey responses, and one of the things we found is that about 23% of people are fully engaged in their jobs. Now, fully engaged are likely to be making a very positive contribution to the organization. They're likely to be out touting the organization. This next group, about half, so 49%, are sometimes engaged. Most of us fit into that category, so about half the organization fits into that category. Charles, what's interesting about these is I'm seeing all these headlines, these scare tactics that are out there that are saying 78% of your employees are disengaged and likely to quit their jobs. We've had a number of other webinars along these lines where we show that that's not actually accurate. Most of your employees do have the desire to be engaged. In fact, we have 24% of the employees that are waiting to be engaged. We call these the opportunity group in our technical words. This is the group that could be engaged if the right situation was there.
Yeah.
Were there. And then we have about 4% of your organization that's fully disengaged. What's funny is we've done studies on those 4% to see whether or not they actually ever engage, and less than 1% of those fully disengaged employees ever will engage in an organization, meaning we follow them year over year in an organization, and unfortunately they quit and stay with that organization. So, bottom line is people in your organization are engaged. The employee experience for the most part is solid. It's good, but there are certain things that we can change. So Charles, take a look at this statistic. This came from 20.1 million responses.
So the question, I can speak up without fear of retribution, and the response that we received was 34% of employees do not speak up for fear of negative consequences.
Yeah, what does that tell you about their employee experience?
There's probably a lot of politics going on. They've had probably a negative experience in the past, which has trained them not to do so, or they've learned from others in the organization that, hey, you just don't speak up. Keep quiet around here. Don't rock the boat.
That's it. So my employee experience, if I'm one of those 34%, is exactly that. It says don't speak up because there are going to be some negative consequences that happen if you do. Now that's a third of your organization. Think what you've lost. You've lost innovation. Think of what that means if I'm on the other end of a telephone call with Tracy, and Tracy's talking to me and he's saying that he's had the same telephone bill for the past number of months, and then all of a sudden it changed for the last 4 months. And I'm a customer I'm a customer service representative, and I don't think that I can speak up. So what am I going to do? I'm going to shut up about it.
Yeah. Well, the difficult thing is in those situations, they then have to put up either with the abuse from the customer who gets irate about it, or they have to put up with the fear that comes from maybe losing their job or risking some type of clout with their boss somehow over the situation.
Yeah, so a third of the employees here, and again, this is not a small database. This is worldwide. I believe this was 70 countries. Is that right?
Yeah.
Across 70 countries, didn't feel like they could speak up for fear of negative consequences. That tells us something about that employee experience that we may not want to hear, but we need to hear it. So what does that mean as an employee? I don't feel like I can speak up, or some of these other negative responses.
I see some people really either checking out. You get into that learned helplessness state where you just kind of say, forget it, I'm not going to, I don't care. They let things stay broken. They don't say anything about, bad processes or things that are going wrong. And they just hope that sometimes I think people just hope that things break or that it's all going to hit the fan one day, and then they'll get it, then they'll understand. But I'm not going to do anything about it until it really causes a big problem.
Well, ultimately, this would certainly lead to attrition, but that may be later on down the road. So I'm going to go to the definitive expert on loyalty here, Dwight Schrute from The Office. Would I ever leave this company? Look, I'm all about loyalty. In fact, I feel like part of what I'm being paid for here is my loyalty. But if there were somewhere else that valued loyalty more highly, I'm going wherever they value loyalty the most. I love that. I think that says it all. Classic Dwight Schrute, but also maybe some of the sentiment that our employees are feeling. So ultimately, it could result in attrition and would result in attrition.
Yeah, you can only put up with so much of that.
But in the meantime, what about those 34% of employees who aren't saying anything? I'll refer to another expert here. This is Jack Welch. Maybe he has some more street cred than Dwight does.
Yeah.
Jack Welch, this was 10 years ago. He says there are only 3 measurements that tell you nearly everything you need to know about your organization's overall performance: employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and cash flow. I love that. I agree with him. I think he's nailed it.
Well, and it gets back to that tie, right? So if you want to have engaged customers, or if you want to have a good customer experience, your employees really need to be engaged.
Really, it is. Right. So those 34% that we just talked about, can you imagine the customer experience that's going to come out of that because of that employee experience? So employee engagement, customer satisfaction, and cash flow. Let's talk about what the employee experience actually is. We've talked about customer experience and customer satisfaction. So let's define the employee experience. You mind reading that?
Yeah, so the employee experience is the sum of interactions between an organization and its employees. The experience impacts the way an individual thinks, feels, and performs.
So the sum of interactions, it's not just a single interaction, but it's various between what I as an employee experience and what the organization gives to me. And that in turn affects what I do. So I want to refer to a concept that we talk about in some of our workshops that we call the employer-employee contract. So this is the idea of there is some type of contract that I as an employee have with the organization has with me. So Charles, as I look at the contract, what would you say is in the employee-employer contract?
Well, you're always negotiating the pay, the benefits, your job tasks, things like that.
Right. So the organization promises me certain things. They promise to pay me.
Mm-hmm.
They promise to pay me for what I do. Now, notice we're not saying they promise to pay me well or promise to pay me above market value, but they promise to pay me according to what I do. They have certain benefits that come as part of the overall compensation package.
Yeah.
There are certain other things they as an organization, promise me some type of safety.
Yeah, and training as well, so I know how to do my job.
Yeah, so they will give me the skills I need in order to do my job well. Now, along with that also comes the tools that I need in order to do my job. So if I pop into the organization and I'm asked to run all kinds of pivot tables in Excel, and I have a Commodore 64 desktop that won't run anything, well, they've not met their end of the employer-employee contract.
Right.
They promise me safety, as I mentioned, and that safety doesn't just have to be physical safety. It could be emotional safety also. I need to work in an organization that allows me to have dignity in what I do and respect in what I do. So that's what's in the employer-employee contract. Now let's look at the other side of that. I, as an employee, promise certain things in return. So I promise for that pay that my end of the bargain is that I will give an honest day's work for that honest day's pay.
Mm-hmm. I'll show up at this hour and leave at this hour.
Exactly right. Do I promise that I'll give 110%? Not really.
No, I guess there could be some performance metrics that you need to meet, minimal standards, that sort of thing.
So that's the next part. I will meet the minimal job standards or minimal job expectations in order to be here. I, as an employee, also make a promise to you, or part of my contract, I contract with you, that I will obey the legal regulations of the organization. So I will follow the policies and procedures of the organization. I will follow the law as I deal with things. That's part of what's in my contract as well.
Yeah.
Now, there are certain things within that contract that may be more along the lines of a psychological contract. So when we ask this question, as we do workshops or engagement sessions, we ask the question, what's in the employer-employee contract? And they start, throwing out the things that we just did. And then they start going to things such as, well, they owe me growth opportunities or advancement, or they owe me opportunities to learn or opportunities to do X, Y, Z. And then we ask the question, is that true? Is that in the contract? And they say, no, not really, but it's implied. Mm-hmm. And what we're talking about here is the implied contract. So what about the psychological contract? Now, as we work with organizations to understand what's in their psychological contract, we use an idea that's called the employee question. What is a good day for you at work? What's interesting, we ask this question in workshops all the time. We have them spend about 15 minutes defining what a good day at work looks like. What's funny is the answer always comes up. Anytime my boss is not around, it's a good day at work. It always comes up. So that's a different story. But what does a good day at work look like for you? And what we find is that never do they say things like Taco Tuesdays. Mm-hmm. They don't say, I got to play on the foosball table.
Had a good nap today.
Had a good nap in my nap pod. They say things like, I feel like I got something done. I feel like I learned something today. I feel like I really helped somebody.
Yeah.
I feel like I helped my employee, or I really helped that customer. I felt like I did something really cool that I accomplished that I've been trying to get done for the last couple of weeks. That's a good day at work. Now, when your employee value proposition includes those kind of elements, such as we'll help you grow, we'll help you be a better person, we'll give you the time off you need to take care of your family, or that flexibility or that autonomy, we will help you with your school, we'll help you, give you that time that you need to, and help you along those lines, that's when your EVP really adds long-term value. So one of the first things that we recommend is you're looking at the customer experience and then moving that to the employee experience is, in your employee experience, what is your EVP? What is it that you offer that's of value, and is that something that your employees see of value? We also look at this idea of satisfaction versus engagement. One of the things Charles mentioned is we used to talk a lot about customer satisfaction, and it's now moved to customer experience. Well, we used to always get all kinds of calls about, will you help us measure and improve customers or employee satisfaction? And now we've shifted to this idea of engagement. And the reason is because satisfaction is very transactional. If you give me this, then I will give you that. The company promises certain things, and I as an employee promise certain things back. Okay? So if you work an extra half an hour, then I will pay you an extra half an hour or an extra hour. It's very transactional. It looks like this. The company deposits something into an emotional account. The employee takes from that emotional account and also deposits as well. And it kind of goes back and forth. But the minute that becomes out of balance towards the company or the employee, then we start to see things not that we don't have that equilibrium that we needed. And it becomes a very transactional relationship.
And the problem companies run into is that they try to offer these great perks or benefits or pay or whatever the case might be, which are all satisfaction elements, and it kind of grows and grows and grows to a point where maybe they have to take one away, like Taco Tuesday is gone or something like that, and it hurts. Like, employees feel like, hey, that was something I expected, and now it's taken away, and so I'm receiving less for my effort now overall, and so that it throws it out of whack.
It throws it out of whack. That's right. So let's look at. So I'm taking off the employee lens for a second. I'm looking at it through the employer lens, and I'm saying, let's give these guys a $1,000 bonus. Hey, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to receive that $1,000 bonus. How long does that bonus last? Well, psychologically, the research shows that bonus lasts about 2 weeks, and after that 2-week time period, then if I don't get another bonus next time, then all of a sudden the company has taken something from me.
Yeah.
So we look at it through the employer lens and say, I just gave them a bonus. From the employee lens, that's become something I've expected. So let's look at this, explore this concept in more depth about the employer and the employee lens. Notice that we see that we have an employer on the one side, and we see the employee lens at the other side. If we looked at events that happen in our organization through the employer lens and not employee lens, we might see that these two things don't come together. Let me give you an example of this. So we have the employer lens.
Yeah, so the employer is looking at things like finances, cost control, customer expectations, the list goes on, but it's really centered around economic factors, right? They're reporting back to the shareholders, or they're trying to make their financial numbers. Maybe they just got bought out by a private equity firm, and so there's real stress on meeting that financial obligation that they have.
So my question is, Charles, are these inaccurate?
No, they're entirely relevant and valid.
Very valid.
And actually, a lot of employees are behind these too. The employees feel like customer expectations are important, or that new products in the market are important things to focus on. But they look at it, like you said, through a different lens.
So let's use an example of a layoff. So the employer lens says, well, let's say we're talking about a small amount. It's less than 0.5%, and it only affects one department. So the employer lens is what?
So they look at it and say, okay, times are tight right now. We've got to make some changes. We're too heavy in this one area. We need to make a small adjustment in order to kind of get our books right, so that we have a big payoff. We can pay dividends. Employees can, their stock value increases or whatever. So they're looking at this and saying, this is a good thing for most all employees, because we're going to be a healthier, more thriving company moving forward.
We're saving 99.5% of the company by making this change in 0.5% of the company.
Right.
And it's all very valid. It makes sense. We've all seen this happen. Now, we look at things through the employee lens, and it's a little different. We're going to come back to that scenario in just a second after we explain what the employee lens is.
Yeah, so as an employee, you're looking at your own health, and not just benefits, but am I in a healthy working environment?
Yeah, I'm looking at this from my own health standpoint, and I went out and did some mountain climbing with a bunch of scouts not very long ago, and I hurt my back. It wasn't anything very serious or anything like this at all. But I came, and for a few days, I wasn't concentrating very well. I was thinking, I'm going to go home and rest.
Was that why you're so crabby?
That's exactly what I was. You know exactly when that was. So, I'm looking at this saying, I just don't feel good today.
Yeah.
I just don't.
And it's also psychological, right? So if you're coming home every night and you're complaining to your spouse that, it's just such a hard place to work and so much stress and I'm getting burned out, that's another thing that goes into your health situation. So there's flexibility, whether it be autonomy or just, your work flexibility. taking care of daycare. Maybe the company doesn't even offer daycare, but you can bet your employees are concerned about their kids when they're getting home, who's going to pick them up from daycare, organizing their lives around all that stuff. Promotion, advancement, work-life balance, we talked about, competing demands. Anyway, relationships at work, that's another huge one.
Okay.
People either love their job a lot of times because of that, or they hate their job because of the relationships there.
So you look at life through the employer lens, and I'm going to be the employee, and you're looking at this and saying, all right, we have to consider the financial ramifications, the market, what's happening in other departments, other employees, fairness, legalities, all that kind of stuff. And I, as an employee, say, yes, that stuff's important. I understand, but here's the lens that I'm looking at it through. And that's different.
Yeah, because the employer would say, hey, we're giving you a great severance package. We've got all these resources set up to help you get another job. You can go through all this training, but still, it doesn't really help the employee.
So the question is, which lens is accurate? Is it the employee lens or the employer lens?
They're both accurate.
Let's go back and look at that example that we just talked about, the layoffs. So the layoffs, it affected 0.5% of the organization. It was part of a department, and it needed to happen in order to increase the effectiveness of the organization. What am I seeing as in the employee from the employee lens?
Well, now you're worried. You're saying, is this an indication that the company is doing bad? Do I trust my leadership now? Do I trust that they're telling me the truth, that this is a limited, small-scale type of change? Or is this just going to happen again in another department? And the real question, am I next? Am I going to be the next one laid off?
Exactly right. That's actually called the survivor syndrome. So is the company circling the drain? Do I need to start looking right now?
Yeah.
In fact, there was a Harvard Business Review study done about 5-6 years ago that said that the number of employees that leave during a layoff is actually 5 times the number of people that were laid off.
Wow.
And it's because of these exact things, that survivor piece. So the idea here is, what are we looking at? What lens are we looking through? I'm going to give an example of a company that's one of our clients that are wonderful to work with, and I won't give the company name. And this is an organization that basically 10 years ago looked at their competitors. It was a smaller organization at the time, and looked at their competitors and realized that out of 5 key players in this space, they were number 5 in terms of revenue, in terms of market share, in terms of all kinds of different measures that were there, profitability. And they said, how do we distinguish ourselves? We offer basically the same type of services as everybody else, the same industry, no real differentiating factors, and it's very hard to differentiate. And they said, the one way we can do this, the real competitive advantage, is what would happen if we started seeing things as if we were their employees, and we started making sure that the employees came first in everything that we do. And so instead of looking at the customer as the end result, or looking at profitability, the end result, they said, let's start looking at things through the employee lens. Yeah, there's some of the things that the employees are asking for that may not be something that we want to give, but let's make sure that we understand what life is as an employee. Well, to make a long story short, they are now number 1 in their industry, and of course it ends right because we wouldn't select a story that ended wrong.
Right.
Number 1 in their industry in a number of different areas because they follow the idea that the employee is the lens that we need to be seeing things through rather than the manager.
And it was really, it started off as the issue was we need to decrease our turnover in order to grow. We'll never be able to achieve the numbers we need to at the turnover rate that we have right now.
So they started with the idea of perks. Well, let's bring in this stuff and let's start bringing in some lunches and some food and things like this. And it was cool. It helped them. But when they started looking at the idea, and remember, this is a real big mind shift for most organizations, to say instead of looking at the employer lens, you still have to keep that. You still have to consider profitability and, of course, everything along those lines. But what if we were to look at life through the lens of the employee and everything we did, and ask ourselves the question before every decision we made is, how would the employees see this? Or how would they react? Now, when we look at the life cycle of employees, we look at time. And time actually in the ancient Greek had 2 different ways of looking at it. One was through chronos, and the other one's through kairos or kairos. There are chronological events that happen in an organization. What if we were to look at these events through the employee lens? So here's an example. This is an employee life cycle. And typically an employee goes through these stages of an organization.
Yeah, so you've got your pre-hire where you're applying for the position, you're going through some interviews, you're asking your friends or whatever, other people you know about the company. Then you get hired, go through the onboarding process, and that could be over a couple weeks or during a whole year. Then as you're in the organization, your performance is measured. You're required to, increase and become better. Growth is a big thing, not only in terms of promotion, but training, receiving new assignments, and finally, the exit process. So how was that handled? Was it handled professionally if you were terminated, or if you decided to leave, was it on good terms?
Good. Now, a lot of companies are now starting to get much better at looking at the employee life cycle and looking at the employee life cycle through the lens of the employee even. They're starting to do that, and I'm happy to see that. But let's just take one of them. Let's say pre-hire.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, let's take Sarah. So we have Sarah up here in the top left part of the slide, and then on the right side we have the company. And Sarah comes in, and basically she sees an ad.
Mm-hmm.
Now those ads go all over the place, but this particular ad that Sarah saw was for an organization, and it didn't really tell her very much. She knew that there was a customer service position that was open. Didn't tell her much about the flexibility of the position or some of the things she wanted to know, but she responded to an ad. Then what happens is she sends in an application. Now she starts filling out the application, but Charles, the application isn't a normal application.
Right. So you go online, you're using a tool that's somewhat limited and somewhat of a cookie cutter tool that's handling all the applications for the whole company. And so she's filling this out. She sees things on there like, do you have a forklift operator's license?
Right. And she's applying for a customer service position.
Yeah. She can't attach her resume that easily. And so she's got to kind of rework all of her resume and all of her work history into this application so that it gets put into the system right and meets their criteria.
And she's not able to get to the people that she wants to be able to get to. It's all handled, remotely. Mm-hmm. Now, I realize I'm hitting some nerves here as I'm talking to different people because they're saying, but we have so many people going through this. Well, yeah, that's true, but you're also looking at this through the employer lens and not the employee lens. What Sarah's seeing is she answered an ad that doesn't say very much about the organization or what her job is. She applies for a position and is asked about forklift certification and all kinds of emergency medical information and things like this that don't really get at what she's applying for, nor do they help her become more engaged even before her job. So she goes through the interview process. Now, once in a while, we're brought on by companies to help with the interview process. And by that, what I'm talking about is we use a lot of psychometric assessments and interviews to be able to select high-level candidates for, say, C-level suite positions. And one of the last individuals that I spoke to, I asked the question, tell me what you thought of this interview process. And it was wonderful because he opened up and he said, I'll be honest with you. If this company operates the way that their interview process is, I don't want to work here. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, this is the 6th interview I've been through. He says, I understand you need to get the right people here, but you realize that of these 6 interviews, this has taken about 9 or 10 hours of my time. I'm currently employed and I'm taking time off to do these interviews, and I'm not getting any feedback as I go through here. They move me to the next person rather than giving me feedback about how things are doing. They're not even answering my questions when I say, how am I doing?
Well, and typically the attitude is, hey, you're lucky to be here.
Yeah. You're taking my time, and so you better be willing to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
Now, again, I may hit some nerves here, and that is when we look at it through the employer lens, we're saying yes, but we need to make sure we get the right candidate. True, I agree, but from the employee lens, it's saying, I just went through 9 hours of interviews and haven't gotten any feedback at all. Okay, so things go well. I check the forklift certification or whatever that is, and I've gone through my 9 hours of interviews, and I get the offer. The offer comes to me, and it is just a quick phone call, and then I also get a notice in the mail. And on my offer letter, it says, here's your compensation, and it also says, and for the next 90 days, you will be on kind of not a probationary period, but an evaluation period.
Yeah.
And at the end of 90 days, we'll sit down with you and offer you, if things work out well, we anticipate we'll offer full-time employment. Well, what's that telling me through my lens?
It says you need to uproot your family, move across country, join our company, and hopefully you'll have a job after 90 days.
That's right. You're still on trial. We don't really believe in you enough that we're going to give you a firm offer and a job. By the way, we're not going to sign all these things. You're going to get a laptop that is a hand-me-down from several generations ago because we're not sure whether or not you're going to work out yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Employee lens, and we may be exaggerating, but you can see some of these things happening. Day 1. All right, so give us a day one scenario. Sarah comes in, and what happens?
Yeah, so she goes, she checks in, she signs in at the desk. They find her information. She's supposed to be there. They put her in a room, and she has to sit there for probably a half hour until somebody shows up and tells her what to do. Now, here's an experience my daughter just had. She's 16 and just got a job, and she stayed and waited for 2 hours with another kid in the cafeteria area of this company, and no one ever showed up. So she left and never went back and worked there again. Got another job.
All right, so we're looking at far extremes on some of these, but it may not be too far. What would happen if on the other end of this, then our COO just came from an organization where it was interesting. He talked about what happened on their first day. This was a professional consulting firm. Talked about for the first month, they were assigned a mentor, and that mentor's responsibility was to make sure that individual succeeded. That was their primary job. So that mentor did everything he or she possibly could from the initial offer and even the interview process to make sure that individual succeeded. They were right there following them all the way through, talking to them through the entire period and making sure that that individual succeeded.
Nice.
They looked at life through the employee lens. And then the orientation process. A lot of people, they bring you into an organization, they spend 5 minutes talking about your culture, and then what they do is they launch right into the benefits and fill out these forms, and here are your legal forms that you need to do.
Right.
So what we're getting at here is when we look at things through the employer lens and look at the chronological events, it makes sense. It's logical, but when we flip that and look through those chronological events through the employee lens, we may realize that maybe things aren't exactly what we thought they were.
Yeah, and you need to really engineer the process to really engage people in what they're doing.
Exactly right. So we're looking also, I mentioned in the ancient Greek, there were actually two different words for time. One was chronos and the other one was kairos or kairos. So kairos is an opportune moment or interval of time that represents a turning point, a decision, an action or opportunity, a time when conditions are right. So basically the difference here is that a chronological event is something that happens chronologically or in order, and it's planned, such as you're hired, you're oriented, you're indoctrinated in the organization, etc. Well, the Kairos moments can't necessarily be planned for, but what's interesting is those Kairos moments tend to be real turning points for a lot of employees. An example of a Kairos moment may be let's say the first time I really have a bad customer experience and my boss sits down with me and talks to me. That could be the difference of whether I choose to remain with the organization or choose to leave the organization.
Yeah.
So these Kairos moments aren't necessarily planned, and many organizations, when those hit, see only through the employer lens and not through the employee lens. I'll give you an example of an organization that asked us to come in. They were experiencing 37% attrition, and the loss that they were experiencing because of that attrition was not in the thousands, it was in the multi-millions. Very, very expensive for this organization. They asked us to come in and understand what was going on in the organization. Well, when we got in there, we found it was even more dangerous than we thought. Not only was it 37% attrition, but they also lost half of their employees in months 8 and 9. So we hired Sarah, we brought her on, and we lost Sarah at month 8 or 9. And we were losing half of our employees during those months. So there was something that was happening or not happening in those months that if I were to look at it through the employee lens, which we did, we get a better understanding. Well, what we found was happening was that the honeymoon was over. So they finished learning. Now, by the way, this organization brought on very, very smart individuals. So these are people always with a college degree, most of them with a master's degree, and they would bring them in and they would get them moving quickly and they would teach them all kinds of things and get them very excited. But what would happen in months 8 and 9 is the honeymoon was over, they stopped learning, and what we noticed, according to what they were saying, is I stopped growing. I stopped learning.
So they became proficient, but then they saw that there was really no room to grow thereafter?
Exactly right. But the company, what was interesting on this one is the company had already identified that 8 or 9 month point a year earlier. And they said, well, there's nothing we can do about it because we don't have growth opportunities for these people. We can't advance them.
Mm-hmm.
And they knew this was the case, but they were looking at things through the employer lens and not the employee lens. So we put on the employee lens and said, yes. What would happen, however, if during months 8 and 9 we were to start doing things that they could grow and develop these individuals? And they came up with an entire list. They did some brainstorming, spent half a day on it, and came up with this list of things that could continue to promote growth for those employees during that period of time. And great results in terms of reduction in attrition. So good outcome from that one by putting on the employee lens. Now, at the end of last year, we finished a book. The book was called Magic, and one of the things that came out of Magic were some interesting findings. The first one is that we realized that engagement is a 50-50 proposition. What that means is that the organization owns 50% of whether or not an individual is engaged. By putting on the employer lens and creating things that would create engagement for the employee, or an environment where I can choose to engage. But the other part of that is owned by the employee. By looking through the employee lens, here are the things that create engagement for me as an individual in this organization. The next thing was interesting, and that was that most of us want to be engaged.
Yeah, and so it's kind of this innate desire that we have to do good work, to really contribute, and to have a meaningful career or job that really that really helps us feel like we're something more than just the average worker in the door.
Yeah. And then that leads to the next point, that most of us are engaged. Most of us are engaged most of the time, despite these statistics, these scare tactics that have come out, and they're all reasons why these results have been manipulated. But most of us really are engaged or want to be engaged most of the time. Now, here's the real kicker, and that is the customer experience is directly impacted by the employee experience. So if I'm disengaged as an employee, the type of service that you're going to receive as a customer is going to be a disengaged or disingenuous service.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things also that we found as we looked at Magic is that organizations put on the employer lens. So they're looking at things like, how can we cause them to be engaged, or what can we do to do things? And they bring in the foosball tables and all these cool things that are awesome. But instead of looking at what the real value proposition is, and that is what do the employees really want, these organizations are failing in these efforts, and it's costing them a lot of money to do that. So Magic was actually a culmination of a lot of research. Again, more than 14 million survey responses went into this research, and we came out with an acronym. Magic's actually an acronym that stands for meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. We find that when those elements are present, individuals tend to engage. So when we put on the employee lens and we start seeing things through what they're asking for these 5 elements: meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. Now, the other things, such as the satisfaction elements, still do have to be there. There's no question. So, Charles, can we go through and explain some of these magic elements?
Yeah, let's talk about those.
Okay. So the first one is meaning.
So meaning is, your work has purpose beyond the job itself. You really feel like it's not just about getting a paycheck, but you're contributing something to the greater good.
Right. So employer lens is, look, just be glad you have a job. I remember actually when I must have been 16 or 17, hearing my employer say, you should just be grateful that you have a job. And he wasn't trying to be mean when he said this or anything. He was talking about the economic environment at the time, but I remember that stayed with me, however many years later.
Well, and from an employee or employer standpoint, you don't want to be all focused on revenue, right? Because that's not meaningful to people.
It's important as I look through the employer lens, absolutely. But as an individual through the employee lens, I'm saying, but yeah, what does this job actually mean? What's the purpose? Why am I really doing this? Yeah. So employer versus employee lens. Next one is autonomy.
So this is about the power to shape your work and environment in ways that allow you to perform at your best. It doesn't necessarily mean you can choose to do whatever you want to do, but you want to have some sort of ability to make a decision about how your work is done, or where you work, or who you work with.
We're not talking anarchy here, right? There have to be rules and guidelines. Employer lens says, okay, you have to be here at this time, you have to be in your cubicle, you have to be doing this, you have to be doing that. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now we look at it through the employee lens, and the employee is saying, yes, but if I could just tweak this a little bit, I could actually deliver better performance if I were allowed to do it in this way or fashion. So that's autonomy. That's the A of magic. The next one is growth.
So growth's a little bit different. It doesn't necessarily mean promotion. It means being stretched and challenged in ways that result in personal and professional progress.
Okay, so I'm an employer, and I'm looking at growth. And we hear this all the time when we do the employee surveys. So one of the lowest scoring questions, or lowest scoring sections, is always in the growth component. And the employer comes to us looking through the employer lens and saying, I can't do anything about this because we're a fairly flat organization and I can't promote these individuals. So what do? It's an interesting question because they're looking at it through the employer lens. Let's switch that and look at it through the employee lens. So the employee lens isn't really necessarily after a promotion. They may be after something else.
Yeah, many people, especially younger employees in the workforce, are looking for experiences that can help them grow and build their resume so that they have future opportunities when the time is right to take on more challenge and advance their careers.
Yeah, work on this cool project or do this thing that you've never learned before. Let me work with this individual who may be a mentor. That's the employee lens. The next one, the I of magic, is impact.
So seeing positive and worthwhile outcomes and results for your work.
So I'm putting on the employer lens, and with the employer lens, what I do is I measure key performance indicators, KPIs. These are the things that I care about as an organization. Exactly. We should be doing that.
Yeah.
Now let's put on the employee lens. The employee lens says, yes, those are important. But look at all this other stuff that I'm doing that you're not measuring.
Or they want to see line of sight. How does my contribution matter to the overall, number or success of the organization?
Yeah, how does this little widget that I'm producing save a life? What is the end result of this? And I, as an employee, want to make sure that what I'm doing actually adds some value instead of just be quiet and fulfill your KPIs and make sure those are high.
Right.
So employer lens versus employee lens. Last one is connection.
So this is the sense of belonging to something greater than yourself. Now, we think about this many times in terms of that social connection, having friends at work or getting along with the people that you work with. But it's more than that. So it could be connected to the culture of the organization or your job role. You identify yourself as an electrician or something, the tasks that you perform.
The employer lens says, look, you are one of our employees. We expect you to represent the company. And they should. You're part of the organization. We expect that you belong to the organization. But putting on the employee lens, they say, yes, I will fulfill those requirements, and I will speak positively about the company and things like this, but I don't really feel like I belong here.
Yeah.
The classic example that we use is Disney. These are Disney cast members. They feel like they are part of Disney, and that they're part of this show that belongs there. I'm connected to the organization, and I feel like I belong there. So meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. And when we look at those things that the employees are really trying to tell us through the employee lens, then we start seeing things in a different light. So let's sum this up. What do we really do? First, number one is think and measure employee experience. Charles, you had a question that popped in, it looks like, about the employee experience.
Yeah, so how do you exactly measure that? If you're measuring engagement or satisfaction, how do you measure their experience? Is it done through an annual survey or pulse surveys? What's the best way?
There's not one single method to make it happen, but what I would say is that you as an organization, if you're trying to measure through an employee survey or focus groups or whatever, go back to those examples that I was using of the customer experience, where they weren't trying to measure what the customer was trying to say. They were trying to measure what the organization wanted to know. So as you conduct these surveys, make sure you're asking questions about what the employees want to tell you. Written comments are a great way to do this.
Yeah, use open-ended questions.
Open-ended questions, focus groups, methods where they can provide suggestions and feedback. That's thinking through the employee lens and the employee experience. The next one is to know and understand your EVP, your employee value proposition. If I come to you and I ask you the question, tell me why individuals work for you, and you can't answer me that question in a way that corresponds with what the employees are saying, then you're out of touch. And I would tell you most organizations I work with have no idea what their EVP is.
Yeah, it's really simple. It's what attracted you to work here, why do you work here, and what causes you to really perform at your best.
That's right. Next is start seeing your organization through the employee lens, like we talked about. Start shaping the way you make decisions using the employee lens. We're not asking you to remove the employer lens, but we're asking you to see things through the employee lens. Next is look at the employee experience through both Chronos and Kairos Moments. So what are those key moments that are pivot points in your employee's life cycle? And then finally, bring the magic, meaning, autonomy, growth, impact, and connection. So there we are, Charles, taking a look at life through the employee lens and through the employee experience.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. I think it's been really good. We've talked about, three topics that begin with an E: the employee value proposition, the employee experience, and employee engagement. They're all interrelated, but there's a different way to kind of approach each. And this employee experience kind of is that umbrella from which you need to look at how your employees are experiencing your organization. And it comes through that employee lens topic that you talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Well, Tracy, we are out of time today, but I want to thank you for the presentation. Everyone on the webinar, look forward to an email from me. I'll be sending out an email with a link to the slides and some other resources from our webinar today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.